you know, it's nice to be back. I always look forward to coming to Vancouver. I've had a very strange career. I began my life as a teacher of special needs kids, one of whom said to me one day, "It doesn't matter who you vote for, the government always gets in." Smart kids. Then I worked as a therapist. I used to be a psychotherapist. I used to work with schizophrenics and depressives. And now I consult for the Premier of Alberta, which is the same work, better pay, basically. Then I became a businessman in Britain, and I learnt one thing. If you want to run a small business, you buy a big one and wait.
Oh, yeah.
We call that the Eaton strategy here in Canada. And then I became a researcher, which is a great job. You get to ask deep questions like, what's another word for thesaurus? Why isn't the word phonetic spelled as it sounds? So deep questions like this. But I gave up when the questions became things like, if never the twain shall meet, how did Shania get pregnant? You know. So, oh, by the way, I'm a Yorkshireman, which means that we speak our mind even if there's nothing in there. And we are not politically correct and frankly don't care. So this is why I no longer work in institutions. I just work for them. I'm going to talk about the future, which is always a problem. I prefer this notion of the future from Dan Quayle, great Vice President of the United States, who said when he was visiting Latin America as Vice President of the United States, if I'd known I'd be visiting Latin America, I would have learnt Latin in school. Yeah, exactly. Mind you, we had a Minister of Education in Alberta who said he wanted every child in Alberta to be above the provincial average. We were so impressed with this, we made him Finance Minister. His name was Jim Dinning. I actually worked for him as Finance Minister. He was actually a very smart guy. He's now the Chancellor of the University of Calgary. So things can happen. But this is my kind of view, that the future, as I'm going to describe it, I'm not going to describe anything that's not already happening. The question is that you need to think about, particularly at this moment, as you're going through a kind of strategic think about where you're going, is what do we see in our world that's going to be very different? And how can we leverage that opportunity to be a leading edge institution as opposed to a follower? And you're positioned with a new president and a new opportunity to review these kind of questions quite powerfully. One of the options you don't have is to hope that the future goes away. So doing nothing, well, look at your Premier. Oh, sorry, you don't have one, do you? So let me set a context for what I want to talk about in terms of education. This is a very disruptive time. Let me give you a very practical example. Alberta used to be a wealthy province, and we were wealthy because of natural resource revenues. The biggest single revenue that was important to us was natural gas revenues. So for every gigajoule of gas that was sold, the province took a percentage of that. The price of natural gas has collapsed from what we thought it would be, around about $7, to less than $4. Western Canada Gas on Tuesday of this week laid off 190 people. There are layoffs going on in the gas sector. And this isn't because we don't know that we're running out of gas, quite the opposite. It's because there's a surplus of gas. And there's a surplus of gas because of a new breakthrough technology. So technology has changed the industry so completely that the analysts tell us it will not get to above $5 a gigajoule until probably about 10 to 12 years from now. So the revenues of the province of Alberta now depend crucially on sex, drugs and rock and roll, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Well, it is at my age. But we now, the second largest source of revenue for the province of Alberta is casinos, gambling and drink. So one of my standard things is if you see a drunk walking down the street in Alberta, go up and thank him. He's paying for your school superintendent. already is your school superintendent. So it's a very disruptive time. And I'm not going to spend hours on this piece, don't panic, but I could, but not at this money. I talk about some changes. There's a massive change taking place in the role of the United States as a superpower. The change is both, at the macroeconomic level, but at the personal level, if you read Richard Florida's work, one of the big changes is in the whole notion of who's going to own what, and in particular, who's going to own their house. In every major industrial revolution, house ownership goes up, and in every major recession, it collapses. And so what we're going to see, and this is a big impact in British Columbia in your lumber industry, is a lack of return of capital for the lumber industry for a long time. And you've also got mountain pine beetle going on here. So if you look at one of your mainstay industries, which depends on housing starts in the US, it's going to be a long time before they return. So there's a massive disruption going on, and Canada's got a real problem. We have very low productivity, actually almost negative productivity in Canada in comparison to the US and other parts of the world. So we just don't compete. And Canada's competitive position has fallen from the third most competitive nation in the world 15 years ago to the 17th most competitive now. Canada's in deep trouble. And one of the reasons one of the key areas that we could do a lot of help with is in the area of literacy. One of the reasons that we lack productivity is quite a large portion of our workforce is not at level 3 literacy, the kind of high-level cognitive processing skill. In nursing, and I know you have a nursing program, in nursing, I've just looked at the Alberta profile, but only about 80% of nurses who are qualified to work in Alberta have level 3 literacy. Right, which 20%, let's put this the other way, 20% of nurses can't do complex cognitive processing. It gets worse, 5% of doctors can't either. So the fourth largest cause of death is medical mistakes. There's a connection between literacy and medical practice. We could do a lot better. And where we're going to do that? Well, it's not going to be done at the universities who, by and large, are becoming less and less relevant. The colleges are the central place for us to look at changing our productivity and competitiveness, which is why the restructuring of your position in terms of ministry is actually a very positive and productive thing for it to go on. So that's one disruption that's taking place. I'm in BC, I don't need to talk to you about political disruption. Who thought Bill Van der Zaan would make a comeback? There's a lot of things going on here, but one of the things that's going on is the decline of democracy. So we have a lack of involvement of people in their local democracy and a complacency about politics, which is very disturbing. So we were thrilled in our municipal elections in Alberta recently in both Edmonton and Calgary when we got over 30% turnout. That's pathetic. We're thrilled in the country if we get a 60% turnout in a federal election. It's just unacceptable. And the reason why people are disinterested is we've lost the ability to engage community in community work. The people that can do that, and one of the focal points for engagement is a place like a college. So I think this is a big kind of issue here. And you look at the rise of people like Sarah Palin. Sorry, I nearly threw up then. So I've got a good suit on, so and Bristol. Oh, I'm going to do a dance now. So you look at this, and 200 million people in the United States think that the Earth began less than 10,000 years ago. So that we have a level of ignorance, which is being exploited politically by people like Sarah Palin, who isn't as daft as she sounds. She's a lot dafter. But we have a real problem about political engagement. And I think that's a big issue. We have social disruption through globalization. I mean, the problem with the housing market in Canada, the States, and around the world is the globalization of money. and money markets and the financial institutions. But there's a lot of social disruption here. Demographic disruption is going on. I mean, you can see that in a place like Vancouver. We're just not breeding enough as Canadians. I mean, I keep trying, but I have 2 sons who are in their 30s, they tell me, and not a lot of evidence for this some days. And we've just become grandparents since I saw you last, since I saw some of you last, so I now have a granddaughter, Lily. That's great, and I'm saying, come on, we need another 4 or 5 of these. And I get this look of horror from the family saying, no, we're just going for 1, which is now becoming the norm. And as a society, we're going to be absolutely dependent on immigration for our economic well-being, which raises all sorts of issues around cultural diversity, language skills, competencies, recognition of foreign credentials, tons of issues here. And, you know, if you look around the world, the biggest issue with the demographic and immigration is not education, which is a lot of the people coming are very keen on education. It's part of their rationale for being here. But the issue is our ability as a nation to deal with a multicultural society. And we pride ourselves in that, but we've never really been tested. We just don't know what we're in for. I'm from the city of Bradford in Yorkshire, which my father said, if ever the world had piles, that's where they'd be. He'd never been to Sarnia. Oh, this is all going on. Oh, great. I work in Ontario a fair bit. I used to work, you know. My hometown, when I grew up, I was born in 1950, had a Pakistan Indian population which was about 5% of the community. It's now about 48% of the community. The official language of the city council is English and Urdu. And so you go to a city council in Yorkshire and have to wear headphones for translation. Sounds strange? Well, no, we're very accepting. There's been race riots. People have died in my hometown because we don't know in Yorkshire how to live with a completely different ethnicity. And I don't think you've been tested here in Canada at all. So I think that's going to be a problem.